Now, it's been several months since the government made the big announcement that it was going to provide interest-free loans to students from low-income backgrounds, which would afford them the hitherto impossible opportunity to go to university. These loans were supposed to be a game changer, which would help get more people into higher education and reduce high levels of illiteracy and poverty. So when is it actually supposed to take off? Well, there is a law enabling it being the Nigerian Educational Loan Fund, but the scheme itself is yet to be functional. And how is it supposed to work? Well, the loan scheme now empowers universities to increase fees, which will be paid back as monthly deductions from the salaries of the beneficiaries 2 years after they complete their youth service. But many questions remain about the scheme. The loan conditions are stringent, and many fear they won't meet the requirements. And what if the students finish school and don't get a job in a country in which huge numbers of graduates are pumped into the labour market, but only a few actually find work? Well, I was supposed to be joined at about this time by the chairman of the ad hoc committee on student loans and access to higher education, Tessa Ubo. He is not here yet. We still hope that he'll make it, but two people who are very knowledgeable about all this are here in the studio with me: the current affairs analyst and professor of communications at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and Arise director of news and politics editor, Sumner Sambo. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. It's always nice to know that you're around, but not just to fill the gap, but because we know that you actually know what you're talking about. Let me start with you, Prof. Just remind us of how the student loan is supposed to work.
Well, we've had one student loan even before this administration.
I mean, you are a teacher, a lecturer.
Yeah. We've had one before, but of course it got moribund somewhat, maybe for different reasons, for reasons around bureaucratic red tapes, Of course, maybe because the economy declined, government was unable to fund it anymore, and it was gratifying to see President Bola Tinubu assume office and announce the revival of another loan scheme. But questions were raised around that time if it was just playing to the gallery, against the background of the government's haste to perform as well. The government was somewhat enthusiastic when it came, and it was prone or disposed to, announcing many people-centric policies. The loan scheme was one of them. It was well-hailed. And 5-6 months down the line, for me, I think that as at the time he announced it, government all the machineries of government were yet to be in place. But now the machineries are in place. I expect it to be under the remit of the Ministry of Education. And do not forget, the processes can be very elaborate, designating those who fit into that bracket, working out the modalities. And I want to believe that the ministry is probably still going through the modalities, and it shouldn't be too long, hopefully, before they announce it, against the background of the obvious determination of the administration to provide palliatives in the educational sector, realizing the importance of tertiary education in the growth and development of human capacity in a nation like our own, that is still suffering in that area in terms of appropriate capacity to help us, to galvanize us to the next level, irrespective of the seeming disillusionment amongst the young ones, leading to, the desire to emigrate. But I think that overall, we are a country that needs some kind of intervention at that level, considering how those schemes have been very helpful in some other countries, in Western societies, for instance, where a lot of students, actually get funded at the tertiary level through some of these interventions. But the system is functional in those places, almost smooth, almost very seamless, such that by the time they finish and until they are able to say that yes, they can start paying back, they get a well-paying job, a job that is satisfactory enough, before government start breathing down their neck for them to provide refunds, to refund those loans, so that government can as well help others who are still behind. Overall, it's not a bad scheme. It's not a bad announcement in our own case, but implementation, we're still waiting for it. I don't think that I will lose hope just yet until maybe government finally settles down, the ministries finally settle down, and of course we are seeing an inability of the government to implement it. But until then, I think I will just want to keep hope alive.
Yeah, well, we're not losing hope. We just want to know when it's when it gets started. And you made a very good point there when Sumner was talking about the fact that you've got this, because it does amount to a very large amount of money. I mean, if you look at President Biden wrote off the debts of, I think, to the tune of about $39 billion or something. So it's a difficult thing to cope with. But back to that central point about where things stand at the moment and when it is actually supposed to take off.
Yeah, Charles, they're supposed to have been the Nigerian Education Bank, which is supposed to have taken off from September last month. That is yet to be put in place. The law setting up this is one that the National Assembly worked upon. And then, of course, they had to quickly receive this bill and start working through the modalities. Now, some of those things were hastily done, right from the announcement up until now. But we are hopeful that before the end of the year, all of this will be put in place, so that this will be different from the Nigeria Students Loans Board that used to be available in the past, which he had made mention of. The major problem we had then was that there were lots of defaulters. People collected loans and gave false addresses, and of course, used false witnesses too. I mean, people verification is very, very important. And then, of course, the modalities for refund. Just like you've asked a very crucial question. If a student has 2 years after graduation to be able to do that, that will mean 2 years after 1 year of the National Youth Service Scheme. And then what if the student is unable to get a job? What now happens? In the US, I mean, and other Western societies, you see people owe these loans almost to the end of their lives. I mean, President Barack Obama, it was almost towards the tail end of his career that he had to pay off the loans that he had collected. Lots of people, it's usually a very big challenge. Now, if we're given 2 years, that would just make it 24 months. How realistic is it? And if you look at the inflationary trends in the country, a lot of people may not be able to pay this loan. So the federal lawmakers may likely have to be reviewing these laws from time to time. But a very good aspect of it is the criticism that has come with, the law. Now, the university lecturers, starting from ASU, questioned whether the federal government was not actually trying to run away from its responsibility of funding universities and public education. I remember Professor Emmanuel Oshodeke, the ASU president, specifically mentioned that the federal government seems to be running away from funding public education through this, that it's a sort of decoy from its constitutional responsibilities, because it is stated in the Constitution that the federal government must operate public institutions, because, I mean, not everyone can afford to go to universities.
Private universities.
Yes, private universities here and there. So that is the government, by bringing this, trying to shy away from its constitutional responsibility of providing education to its citizens. Now, just yesterday, we heard the Minister of Education saying that, look, the federal government cannot even fund the takeoff of the 6 new federal universities that were put in place by President Muhammadu Buhari before he left government, towards the tail end of the government. So if that is the case, then it means that there's a funding challenge. And with the new law that is supposed to provide this access, and without the education bank being set up, it's beggars belief if indeed the government may not be trying to actually run away from what ASU is saying. It's a tactical way of, it's sort of tactical maneuver to shift away from the volume, the huge volume of young Nigerians who want to access education through the public education system.
Very good point. And Prof, I mean, you don't have to worry about these things. You're in a private university, but you're across these things because you are a current affairs analyst and because you are a lecturer. And I'm sure you liaise with a lot of the other people. But I mean, the points that Sumner was making there about the absolute necessity of making sure that you actually are able to fund these things, and the disparity between what the government is trying to do and what the lecturers are saying. I mean, do you see a difference? I mean, because to be honest, the lecturers, I mean, they're what they want is for the education to be funded. Is it different for if the government gives a loan than if the government just puts that same money into education and funds it? I mean,
Charles, you see, there are different ways in which education can be funded.
Yeah.
You know, it depends on the country that we are talking about, and it's also subject to the political economy that is operational in that country. And countries keep evolving models for funding their education. There's no single route to education, to tertiary education particularly. And that's why, if you ask me, I rather want to be careful about conspiracy theories. You know, I understand, ASU's position. Sometimes ASU want to they want to raise some concerns.
And ASU is the union.
That's right. They want to rightly raise concern, to put government on guard. So that's their forte, and of course, it's sometimes very good for the system, so that government can actually be on guard and think in the best interest of the populace, particularly the youths who are seeking tertiary education. But we have to keep our options open, keep our mind open, as government or even the system tries to imagine new ways of ensuring that the growing population of the country are particularly exposed, to education, tertiary education particularly. Do not forget, our population is exploding, and the explosion is exploding in the face of declining resources. So if we're not creative about how we want to fund the system, there's going to be a problem at the end of the day. If you see in some countries, really, it's just government essentially. In some other countries, it's a binary government, public and private sector. In some other countries, still, the civil society, NGOs are encouraged to flow their own institutions, and government has a way of also backing them, so that they can take in students. Different models. I just imagine that, not necessarily speaking for government, but I think that if government now thinks that they should be creative, ingenious about new ways, no problem. It seems going to be a welcome development at the end of the day, if to accommodate the many Nigerian youths that is burgeoning. Remember, we said that we're in a period of youth bulge, and if you do not attend to them, of course, you're going to be sitting on a keg of gunpowder. No serious government will want that to happen. Perhaps we should just put government on the alert that, look, you gave us a promise some 5-6 months ago, and you are yet to actualize it. When are you going to get this done? Until they fail to do that, then we can begin to ask further questions. Which is also what we've been talking about the need for an active civil society, such that our leaders can permanently be on their toes in terms of their promise, their earlier promise to deliver on the goods, that they probably made to us in advance of the elections.
And obviously, Sumner, I mean, you need a lot of data for this to work. You've got to actually know how many are from low-income backgrounds and whether or not they actually qualify to get these loans. So you think that might be a factor as well? I mean, in sort of the delay that we're seeing?
Yes, it's a very huge factor because data is lacking, and a recent report actually said, for example, that between 40 to 59% of those who have bachelor's degrees and HND certificates in Nigeria are unemployed. So starting from that, that gives you an idea as to the quantum of people who have even gone to school and who don't have jobs.
Yeah.
So the next question is, so was the desire to even go to school any longer when those who have gone to school with their own funding or that of their parents' funding or someone helping them are unable to get jobs? So if I'm taking a loan to go to school, what's the incentive? I mean, when the government is also not making grounds for me to actually get a job when I graduate. So you will see.
And of course, if you're giving people loans, you're going to expect a lot of people to take those loans.
Yes.
So the number of people entering the job
because
market would be huge.
at the back of it is actually to increase access to education. So the volume
Absolutely.
is going to expand.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of poor people, poor families in the country. Now, when you say that someone is
an
about to take
opportunity for
500,
them.
someone's taking 500,000 naira, for example, as loan, or maybe 5 million naira as loan, then the issues of sureties come in. And then you say that before this loan is given to you, it has to be signed by someone who's on grade level this and all of that. Don't forget, one of the reasons that made it very difficult for it to be initially accepted is because of the conditions that were put in place. The conditions were being stringent. But of course, the president loosened up through his chief of staff, providing a lot of explanations here and there. But even then, with the law that has been put in place, you know that the Nigerian Education Bank, when it comes into existence, is going to act as a financial institution. So if it's providing loans, there are other factors that have to be put in place. But if we expand the access to education, and then we have a lot of people coming to take these loans, wouldn't they overwhelm the institution itself in terms of the amount that's available for the institution to disburse as loans? That's one question. And then the other part of it is that the consistency of the loans, how acceptable will it be? And we don't have politicians abusing it. I mean, you and I know what happens if people are looking for jobs. They just get notes and send it to particular people, and then those few children of the elites have access to those jobs. What are we putting in place as safeguards to ensure that lawmakers, politicians, and other people don't just write notes to the bank executives at the Nigeria Education Bank,
a very good
and
point.
then the loans will end up in the hands of those who can actually afford the payment of their tuition? And so the targeted people wouldn't have access because they don't have those that could actually introduce them.
To get to the money.
So because I mean, it could actually be subject to lots of abuse. So we need to put all of this, have data, have access to the number of people who are really poor, and then really know if indeed their families can do that or not. And then lastly, before you come in, why are we not talking about other sources of funding the public education system?
And as Prof
the issues
said,
of endowment.
it makes sense. I mean, you have to diversify your sources of funding, especially when you can't afford it.
I mean, in public universities in other parts of the world, endowment funding is very, very huge.
Absolutely,
from
very,
people who
very
have graduated
important.
from, the older universities that we have around and all of that. The thing is that the management of funds, even in Nigerian institutions, are issues we need to call into question. The issues of corruption, alumnus of, when you have several alumni associations not, wanting to contribute, it's because of the issues of lack of proper accountability. You see, universities, even engaging in businesses, those businesses are not accountable enough to be able to bring in monies into the institutions to fund the institution away from government. And then look at the other aspect. The other aspect we're talking about here in public universities or institutions is that of infrastructure. Now, if we are focusing on providing loans to the students and the lecture theaters balloon because of the increase of access to education, what are we now going to be doing? A classroom that's supposed to take 200 people, once it starts taking 2,000 to 3,000 persons, then of course the lecturers will be overwhelmed. So we've provided access to education, we've given loans, but of course the facilities, infrastructures are not there.
Yes, I presume the argument to counter that, Prof, is the fact that the universities will now be able to raise their tuition fees. I mean, the whole idea is for them to raise it and then the students take loans in order to pay for it, but the universities will find a kind of level where they place the fees so that they can actually afford to equip the university. And that way, other universities, I mean, you can create more public universities. There's now funding coming in, there's incentive to go out there, and there's money to kind of make them work. But the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about and to ask whether you're skeptical about is and I think Sumner touched on this briefly, is the qualifying requirements for that loan. Because I think they need guarantors from specific professions and fields. Yeah. And that is something that a lot of people from rural areas and poor families just won't be able to have. I mean,
well, I think it actually depends, really. We can actually work this things out and find guarantors. There's a way in which there's no individual that is existing in a vacuum in this country that is not covered by some kind of authority. There's supposed to be a local authority, through the local government, you know.
Yeah, but you're talking about a senior civil servant that you either you've got to have two guarantors, a lawyer with at least 10 years experience and or a judicial officer or justice of the peace.
Yeah, and I'm making the argument that all these people, you know, categories of people can be found in every section of this country if we are painstaking about the process, if we are painstaking about finding them. And that's why I was saying that there's no individual that is not covered by one kind of authority or the other. Whether or not those authorities are effective is a different question. If those authorities are effective, of course, they can help every individual to find the right person that will be a guarantor, you know, towards their
but I'm not going to be your guarantor, even though you come to my rights.
Just hold on, I don't
know how you spend your money. You know, I'm not going to be your guarantor for a loan. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, in the system you are very, very familiar with, you know, the British system, for instance, you may have some difficulty, and of course you fall back on your representative. Your representative in the parliament will come and give you some level of coverage, you know, even if to make recommendations to the right professional that will help you out of whatever challenge you are going through. You know, what's wrong with individuals reaching out to their House of Representative member, their local legislator, and saying that, look, I need guarantor for this and that?
I apologize for interrupting you, but the reason they can do that in the UK is that they go through your credit history and see how you pay your bills. I mean, you don't have any credit history to go to with some of these people, and you don't know how they pay their bills. So there's no guarantee that if somebody becomes your guarantor, that you're actually going to consistently pay back the money when you can afford it.
Well, can I consider?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I just imagine that we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere, you know, get leaders who we have elected to be responsible somehow, you know. We'll start somewhere and build the institutions, build the system up to a point of the UK or some other countries where we can trust the system and begin to have a credible credit rating system, as the case could be. I think it's a process, something that will come over time.
That's the key word,
process.
It's
a process, something that will come over time. But one thing we should also underscore is that education is priceless. Sometimes it fertilizes the mind, builds confidence in the individual, and of course, open opportunities for that person, for the benefactor, for the beneficiary, I beg your pardon, for the future. And that's why, before we be talking about education being a step towards getting a fulfilling job, it's very, very important to just understand, have a bigger picture of the philosophical importance of education. That's one. Then secondly, it might also lead us to discussing the kind of education we are providing in this country. Being a university graduate shouldn't be the only qualification for us to describe somebody as being educated. There are so many routes to education. You know, to you saying that your mind is relatively fertilized enough.
And that's coming from someone who has a PhD, who has a PhD in education.
Charles, you know, so I mean, when you are developed to some extent, of course, your opportunities before you become broadened, and there are so many things you can begin to lay your hands on. There's a reason why we often have to bring in technicians from China, from India, to work in factories like the Dangote factory, or to build, huge companies that you can call transnational in this country, because we don't have enough people in those sectors. So it doesn't have to be university education.
I agree with you.
There are other levels of education that we
there's
can begin to
B-Tech,
tune.
there's other qualifications, electricians and all the rest of it.
And those technicians are very, very
that's where they're
relevant,
supposed to be. But that's a very good point. So Sumner, not quite the silver bullet then, which makes it, at the way it is presently constituted, a fairly risky project.
Yeah, risky, but I mean, we can actually surmount some of the challenges because, I mean, it's been widely accepted. Lots of Nigerian youths have seen it as a route for, expanding access to education and then helping those who are really serious to get a very good education. But the emphasis should also be on qualitative education, not just quantitative.
Absolutely.
Because when you have the volume of people having access to education expanding and they are not getting quality education, then there will be a problem, because we also need to look at the curriculum that will be going through. The government needs to focus on infrastructure, like I had said previously, and then we need to expand the period through which we can have these young people passing through the system and then getting jobs, because it's very critical. Let's calculate the end from the beginning. Access to jobs is one very critical reason why someone would want to go to the university, because we've seen a lot of people actually questioning the sort of certificates we get in this country at the moment. So there should be an incentive for someone to know that if I go through this process, get this loan, and get the certificate, there's something out there.
There'll be benefits.
And then that the kind of education I'm getting, the quality of education is such that even if I don't get a job in Nigeria, I could actually take this certificate outside of Nigeria, get a job elsewhere, and some decent money.
It'll be worth taking somewhere.
Yeah, because
else.
I mean, you could actually take a loan and get into the university, and the sort of education you get may just be one. Yeah, that's not qualitative enough for you to be able to get a job in neighboring countries.
I just want to very quickly give Prof the last word, because something else is the cost of governance. I mean, if we can cut back on the cost of governance. I was just going to say that I mean, it's not him in particular, but a lot of people at the National Assembly don't want to come and be asked questions about the new cars they've just been getting. 130 million naira for each car. Which, if they don't have, I mean, they could put towards education.
Well, without prejudice to any specific, or without necessarily referring to any specifics, I think Sumner referred to it earlier. It remains the big elephant in the room, and we keep talking about is the absence of transparency in the system, the lack of accountability. It's still something that is troubling us in this country, and it's something that we seem to be looking away from, even though we recognize it as a major malaise, and so much government funds are wasted on frivolities, and of course our mindset as well is largely neo-colonial, whereby we think that until things are foreign, before we can say, before you can price them, before you can prioritize them, or think that there are things that you should actually patronize. And of course, what it means in terms of complications in forex, which we're actually battling with at the moment. So the leakages in government, that's why sometimes when government is announcing loans here and there, you begin to wonder, at the end of the day, will these monies be properly accounted for? How much can we do to block
the social investment programs?
How much can we do to block leakages?
We can't account for those who collected those loans and all of that right up until now. Just a very few years ago, I mean, in the last government, lots of people collected loans during COVID. The government provided loans. People are unable to pay because of lack of data and so on. But I just want to add that the very good aspect of these student loans I really love about is that if you engage in exam malpractices, you'll be excluded from the process. And so I really love that part of the student loans.
But that's assuming you can actually get someone to be found guilty of engaging in malpractice, which is another story altogether. Okay, Prof, I'm afraid he stole the last word from you, but that's okay.
No, he's my friend.
I mean, he's all our friend, and so are you. Thank you very much indeed, and really very interesting chat. It's a pity the Tessa Uber is not here, but I'm sure he'll make it some other time. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi is, of course, a current affairs analyst and professor of communications at Bayes University in Abuja, and Sumner Sambo is a RISE Director of News and Politics Editor. Thank you.